only place for everything Vikings. 6, 1, 2, Vikings.
Welcome back to 612 Vikings. We are back from our 1-year hiatus from the Viking season. It was so bad that we couldn't record an episode. Just kidding. We had other reasons. But other than that, we are here with Drew and Nick, our best friends. And we got some major Vikings news today, actually. So the Vikings GM, Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, is officially fired from the Minnesota Vikings front office. And we're going to talk about that, talk about some replacements as well, and what this means for the Minnesota Vikings. So, Drew, how about you fill us in on what all happened today on this random Friday, and why fans, I guess, shouldn't be surprised about this?
Yeah, I was working, and then I got the little notification on my Apple Watch, and then it said, breaking it, Kwesi Adofo-Mensah has been fired from the Minnesota Vikings, and I was like, oh, okay. Well, because normally what happens in this cycle is we've seen things happen where GMs get fired on Black Monday right out of the gate, and then they get fired right after the draft in the summer. So it's been kind of an all out of whack. But this is sort of the time where you don't really see GMs get fired, especially when he's had trips to the Senior Bowl, he's had trips to Mobile at the watching practices. So it's kind of a weird timeline of why he's getting fired right now. Especially after a couple of them have already been filled with the Miami and the Atlanta openings. So, but it looks like Rob Brzezinski, the cap guy from Minnesota Vikings, will be the interim GM that'll fill in for the free agency cycle as well as the NFL draft as well. And then they're going to look maybe sometime in May or June, sometime around Memorial Day, is hoping where they'll start to look and bring in some guys and hopefully get this filled up pretty quickly.
Yeah, Nick, what was your initial reaction to this news? I think I was surprised that it happened randomly and before the draft, but I wasn't surprised that he was, I guess, fired. But what's your reaction?
Yeah, honestly, it's one of those things you're honestly really surprised at. But like Drew was saying earlier to me in private, he was saying that, he was kind of thinking that Kwesi was going to get another year, but was kind of surprised that they jumped the gun and did it now, like Drew said, at a random time instead of, waiting till next off season and doing it, like Drew said, some of those spots have already been filled. People have already fired their GMs and brought in new GMs. So, it's kind of just a random time to fire your guy. My initial reaction was kind of just, not surprised, but like Drew was saying, I thought maybe we'd give him another year. But, if you look at what he's done since he's been here, you can't really be surprised.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because they gave him an extension last year, and, you kind of think, okay, this year and then next year possibly, and then maybe move on from him. But looks like the Wilfs, the owners, just kind of thought, hey, we don't like the direction this team is basically going in, and it's time for a change, and might as well do that with a clean slate, kind of go into the draft, the combine, all these important offseason events without our initial GM. So I think that was kind of interesting too, but some replacements for the Vikings GM position. Do the Vikings stick with Rob Brzezinski, our capologist, or do we go with some outside guys? I know Drew has a couple guys that we can possibly take a look at, and I think would be ideal candidates, guys from different teams like the Eagles, they have a good front office, and maybe the Rams, some other guys like that. So Drew, who are some guys that, the Vikings should take a look at?
Yeah, I think the first one is going to be the biggest connection for Kevin O'Connell, and that's going to be John McKay right here from the Los Angeles Rams. Previously has been involved in the front office, has been kind of Les Snead's right-hand man. Since he's had that working relationship with Kevin, it's something that I think could definitely be on the radar for the Vikings this upcoming GM cycle. Just something to watch for. The Rams have done pretty well finding some late round guys, whether that's at the corner position, the safety position. Cameron Kitchens, I know, is one that definitely comes to mind. And then even at the interior D-line, you have Kobe Turner, who's a mid-round pick, who's done really, really well for him. Nate Landman, like some of these guys that are on these Rams defensive fronts and just on the defense entirely are not big household draft names that are coming in rounds 1 or really even round 2 for some of them, and they're still putting up numbers. They're still being really effective when it comes to the defensive part of the ball. And then, flip over on the offensive side, you've got Kyron Williams from Notre Dame. So a fairly big name at the college level, but he was a guy that fell to like the mid round just because of his size. And, he didn't really produce all that much to start his career. He's really turned a corner and has really produced and come alive with the Rams now being their RB1. And then even Blake Corum, he really didn't have a great rookie season, but, he's gotten a little bit more of the RB2 reps and kind of starting to become more of a good complement back to Kyron Williams. And, he was a big guy, put up a ton of numbers at Michigan with J.J. McCarthy. I just think it'd be a good fit for the Vikings, in my opinion, just because they have that experience of finding the West Coast guys on offense and the 3-4 guys on the defensive side of the ball, on the ball, off the ball. So I think he's definitely one that we should definitely be keeping an eye on, assuming that he doesn't get a position filled pretty quickly.
Now, with these outside guys too coming in, if we do bring someone in, Nick, what do you think would be like the most? Would this be an appetizing team to come to? Because the Vikings, they're way over the cap. They're about $35 million over the cap per Vikings fan page I'm looking at here. So 48.9 is their cap space that they're definitely over. But what would make this team appetizing to come to as a GM?
Well, Dustin, I mean, if you want to come to this team, you're already taking over a team that's got one of the best offenses in the league on paper. I mean, you got your Justin Jefferson, you got the best wide receiver in the league, you got one of the best number 2s in the league if he does end up staying, is Jordan Addison. You have Hawkinson, that's another name I could see getting cut to free up some of this cap, but you do have some guys that I think will be let go. The Ryan Kellys, the TJ Hawkinsons, Javon Hargrave probably will be let go this offseason. Will free up a good amount of cap, but I think that there is a lot of potential with this Vikings team, and I think they're all of our players are still in their prime or just hitting their prime. You got, like Grenard, still in that middle age, you know what I mean? Jefferson still in his prime, then you got the rookie quarterback, going into technically his 3rd year, but more like his 2nd year. But yeah, you got a guy like JJ McCarthy, young guy. You got your Justin Jeffersons, and like you said, I mean, if you get a guy like the guy from the Rams, who's obviously looks like he's good on hitting on running backs, that's one of the big things that Minnesota does need right now. So I think there's a lot of things, and another thing too, not even about the team, the roster itself, but the coaching staff. One of the best coaching staffs in the league. You got the best defensive coordinator, and you got one of the best head coaches in the league. So I think there's a lot about this Vikings team that you really should like if you're a guy looking for a GM spot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's one of the more appetizing teams to come to. I know the cap space really isn't too appetizing, but I think the Chiefs have the fewest cap space. So we're right there with them, but at the same time, they've won the Super Bowls. They have a pretty good roster anyway, so it's kind of moving money around and stuff like that. It's what Rob Brzezinski does really well, and for him to be the GM, I think that would mesh, pretty well too. He knows the system. He's been in the league for, a quarter century. So, kind of speaking upon that too, Kwesi, he was a big Wall Street guy, big numbers guy, wasn't a real big football guy, the X's and O's of everything. So, Drew, who are like some guys that you could probably bring in that are big, more football guys, X's and O's, rather than the numbers and analytics and everything like that, because I feel like maybe that's the direction that the Vikings go in, is more of a X's and O's guy rather than a numbers guy, unlike Kwesi was. But who knows what the Vikings go with, what direction they go in. But who are some guys that are more of those X's and O's guys?
Yeah, I think that a guy to look out for is going to be Ray Agnew of the Detroit Lions right here. Kind of coming from that Dan Campbell tree, Brad Holmes, and that front office coaching staff sort of outlook. And let's face it, the free agency class that this Vikings team brought in was to beat Detroit right out of the gate, and they did that twice. So did they do their job? I mean, sort of. I mean, they swept Detroit, and let's face it, they kind of beat them pretty handily the second time around with Max Brosmer under center. So the free agency class did its job, but I think when you're chasing a team, that's usually never a good sign. But he is a guy that is more the black and blue sort of GM who's going to go and have that really nasty O-line. D-line has been a really big part of rebuilding that Lions O-line with Penei Sewell. And, Taylor Decker's already been there, Frank Ragnow leaving. But, Christian Mahogany was a 6th-round pick as a starter now for Detroit. And then you look at their interior with Aleem McNeil and Levi Ruzarike. Those are guys who are not top-end draft picks by any means either. And they found ways to get playing time as well, and it does usually help when you have Aiden Hutchinson on the other side of, on the left or the right side of you. But this is a guy I would think would be more of like that football guy you're looking for. And I think a good thing with him is that he's a little bit older. So, he's a little more seasoned. So, it's not the young, sexy GM that, that could be there for the next 30 years. But do the Vikings really need that right now? I think they just need a guy that can just put effective guys on the field right now and just kind of figure it out later. Look at what the Vikings have with Brian Flores. You have this defensive coordinator has really developed some good positional coaches and one leaving to go to Washington. So maybe just having that experienced vet in the front office and then maybe have an heir to replace him later on isn't the worst idea in the world either. So the only downside is that if you do, unfortunately, you have to give that 2 third-round pick compensatory picks to a division rival. That is something to consider with this move, but this is probably the best football guy I would say that is available right now.
Now, Nick, I know you mentioned, one last thing here too is, KOC being like one of the better coaches in the NFL, for this team, for a GM to come on over. There has been some talks of KOC kind of being on the hot seat, or at least his seat getting warm. Do you necessarily agree with that? And if so, what do you think, this is his last year to kind of make and prove that he can get to the playoffs and get past the first and second round possibly? Or what's your thoughts on KOC possibly being on the hot seat?
I haven't really agreed with him being on the hot seat. I still do think that he's one of the better coaches in the league. He's just coming off a season that he got 14 wins out of Sam Darnold on a year that J.J. McCarthy was hurt, and it was supposed to be a year, well, hell, the backup, literally Sam Darnold possibly was going to be the backup that year. The backup goes out there. It's going to be just one of those years, one of those crappy years. But, you still get 14 wins out of Sam Darnold, and now, all of a sudden, Sam Darnold's in the Super Bowl. Is it crazy to say that Sam Darnold's in the Super Bowl today because of his stop in Minnesota? I'm sure he learned a lot from Kevin O'Connell, but I would not necessarily say he's on the hot seat. I would definitely say getting into the playoffs, winning a playoff game, getting that. Pretty sure he hasn't even won he hasn't won a playoff game in Minnesota yet. Winning his first playoff game in Minnesota, I think, would get a big monkey off of his back. And I think it would show the fans, the fans who want him fired and wanted Brian Flores promoted to head coach. Come on. That's really dumb. You're not going to fire a guy who just won coach of the year last year. Anyways, I don't think he should be on the hot seat. I think you have another season where you miss the playoffs, or if you have a losing record, then maybe you want to start talking hot seat. But for right now, I think he's about, he's lukewarm on the seat.
Yeah, I've been a big KOC guy, and I think since 2022, only one coach remains from that coaching cycle, and that is KOC. So, it's obviously the Vikings are cutthroat right now. If you're not doing your job, you're out the door. So they showed that with Kwesi, and I think who was it, Mike Penn, that just retired. He didn't get fired, but he did retire. So KOC, I think if he doesn't make the playoffs this next year, I really say no excuses, and whatever happens, kind of make your decision then. So anything else, Drew, that you want to add on to this GM search?
Yeah, I think this one would be kind of an interesting one. He actually has a football background. He's actually a multiple sport athlete, has basketball, but he kind of played in the lower ranks. So, Kwesi was a basketball player at Princeton, but never was really a football player at any sort of level. But he did play football a little bit in the younger end, but just his background is really weird and unique. It's just one you really don't see all that often. And that's going to be Tariq Ahmad from the San Francisco 49ers. And the 49ers front office has really just been kind of a hotbed for GMs that have just been getting look after look after look. And most recently, you had Adam Peters with the Washington Commanders, and right out of the gate, year one, Jaden Daniels, Rookie of the Year, NFC Championship game. So don't think that just because you fire a GM that you're starting from square one. This thing can change so fast, and we've learned that with Seattle. I mean, they changed. They had DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, and Geno Smith as their primary offensive guys. Totally changed it. Went with Puka, or not Puka. They went with Cooper Kupp and JSN as their main guys, and then had a balance of Charbonnet and Kenneth Walker with Cooper Kupp playing with Puka prior. So, I mean, things can change so quickly in the NFL, especially one off season. You push the right buttons and things really just start clicking. I mean, things can go quick, and maybe that's what San Francisco has. Maybe that's just sort of the guys that they're really bringing up. But Tariq Ahmad was actually a PE health major. He actually came up in the education background, graduated with that. So he's not really an analytical guy. I mean, you could probably say he's more football, but I think what could help him is that he's more of like that teacher. So he's going to hold people accountable if they are messing up. He's looking there to coach people, which could actually probably come in handy if you're looking to have a front office that could develop young, assistant GMs for other teams and potentially get other compensatory picks down the line. But I think this would definitely be a really interesting hire, especially with how the Niners roster has been really constructed, especially with how injured their team has been. They had a playoff win on top of that, and just a bunch of depth guys with Eric Kendricks, of all guys, getting that game-winning play for him to beat Philly at Philly. Too bad it couldn't happen almost 10 years ago, but better late than never. But I think that's kind of a guy you can kind of look at and see if you can kind of push some buttons there, which is something the Vikings definitely really needed, some more depth overall on this team.
Mm-hmm. Now, before we hop off for this episode, do you have, on your list, was there any guys that you think were kind of like a underrated hire that the Vikings could look at, or just someone that maybe not talked about as much?
Yeah, I think so. I actually got two more. I got Alec Halaby out of Philadelphia. He's that Ivy League guy, so someone, kind of a similar background to Kwesi, but he has been Howie Roseman's right-hand man for years, and, he's a younger guy, too. So if you want that young GM that's been with Howie Roseman, who's pretty much the crown jewel of general managers right now, he's their assistant GM right now, as well as Brandon Brown, who we also interviewed back in the previous cycle, and he's now with the Giants. That's another one we can look at. But honestly, I think one that could be really underrated is one that's in our house right now, who's running the team, could be Rob Brzezinski right here. Mm-hmm. He's basically on a tryout run. I mean, he very well could be a guy that says, hey, I gotta do well for the Vikings, because he's been interviewed. He got interviewed during the last cycle as well when Rick Spielman was let go, and they were looking to promote from within. So, and then they get other guy could be Jamal Stevenson. But if you want a guy who Vikings fans really like, a lot of fans like how he works with the cap and maneuvers guys, especially when you gotta shake some of that extra cash out of that banana tree. Rob Brzezinski's been that guy, having Harrison Smith take a pay cut, trying to finagle our way out of that early 2020s, early Kwesi years, and got us winning right out of the gate with some big free agents that we didn't really think were even possible, with guys like Zadarius Smith. So I think that can definitely be one as well. But I think this will definitely be interesting, but I think Rob Brzezinski is going to be kind of an interesting name to watch going forward, especially with him running the show right now.
Yeah, I think he has a pretty good shot. I would say it's over a 50% shot of, possibly getting the job, because like you said, they were probably looking to hire within. So, it'll be interesting to see what happens, during the draft, how their draft strategy is, during the combine, everything like that too. So, we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens, and we will keep you guys updated on what happens with the GM role for the Minnesota Vikings and anything else that happens from now until then. So with that said, we will sign off for today, and thank you guys for watching. Make sure you guys subscribe, like the video, and we'll be back in the next video. Skol Vikes.